So many cool folks here. Yes, this is going to be awesome today. So yeah, without much further ado, welcome to a very special session of the Game Studies Introductory Lecture featuring a very amazing guest. Thanks to die Förderverein Technische Fakultät, I am proudly welcoming Mirt Kommel to us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mirt Kommel, in usual GSE fashion, I will allow you to introduce yourself because you're a smart man and you know what would be the smartest way to introduce you to the students.
We'll see about that, yes.
We will absolutely see about that. In the meantime, as you swim for words and start building up, your verbal resume before you begin, allow me to hand out something really amazing because I know some of you guys are capable of reading and writing in Slovenian.
How many of you? Well, yes.
Because
Dobrodošli.
There's game studies literature in Slovenian out there. This is one by the man himself, so I'm going to hand that one out for your viewing pleasure and also in case you want to note down the title. And with that, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Felix. Thank you for inviting and guesting me here. I'm very honored to be here. Actually, we met last year at the Cultural Studies Memory Conference on a panel on video games. And the moment we met, we knew we have many stuff to discuss, and this is how we choose to re-meet here in Klagenfurt in Solowitz now. By formation, I'm a philosopher. I did my PhD in philosophy with Mladen Dolar. He's one of the so-called Trojka of the Ljubljana Lacanian School. My PhD was on discourse on violence, so remotely related to video games, let's say. In my other life, I'm also a writer. I wrote 2 novels and 2 detective stories, among other things. And the 2 detective stories were inspired partly by Twin Peaks and partly by, of course, Alan Wake. So this is the connection to my third life. You know the subtitle of Deleuze and Guattari's Mille Plateau and IT Oedipus is Capitalism and Schizophrenia. I'm one of the embodiment of this ideology with the 3 lives I'm living. And in my third life, I'm also a gamer. I write game reviews and articles for the only and therefore best journal for video games in Slovenia called the Azbina. For your Slovenian-speaking part of the audience, worth checking out. And in the milieu of Azbina, I recently also published the book on the 8 art, which will be the let's say, theoretical basis also for today's lecture on Nier Automata, the art of Nier Automata. With the basic, I think, basis covered, I think I can proceed to the lecture.
This is your stomping ground now. Treat it as you see fit, good sir.
Okay, thank you very much, Felix. Yes. So
you're back at the title.
Yeah, it's okay. I just checked if the fingers work, the computer works. Thank you. You can, I think, sit. You don't need to.
Dive into the shadows behind.
Of the okay, the man in the shadow. So the title is pretentiously the aesthetics of Nier Automata, which presupposes, of course, at least a definition of aesthetics. The initial problem one would encounter, which I will not cover in this lecture, is of course the initial question: are the video games art? And if they are art, on what conditions they are art? This is quite a huge polemic, as I'm sure you're aware of, in the video games community at large, especially debates that are ongoing in the United States, in Anglophonic countries, where the people working in the industry of video games are arguing, especially in the indie community, that video games are the new art form that incorporates certain aspects of classical art forms, especially the more modern ones of film and photography, while the critics are trying to argue that video games perform a very different function than the one that the arts perform, and are therefore not entitled to have this status of an art, despite the certain facts that are going on, especially in France and the States, that they gained through the actions of Ministry of Cultures and the critical community, especially the academic ones that are working in the industry, that they try to argue for their status as artworks. And my lecture also let's say, works on the basis that I worked more extensively in the book to try to tackle all these issues. So please bear with me in this sense that I will start in medias res with what's the theoretical basis to regard video games potentially as aesthetic phenomena and as, of course, veritable artworks. And these three guys that I will be briefly discuss in order to proceed then to the analysis of Nier Automata as exemplary case studies are Hegel, Lukács, and Benjamin. I heard that you are already familiar with Hegel, a recurrent figure somehow in the field of aesthetics. Rightfully so, because Hegel was the first to, let's say, systematically deal with the concept of aesthetic, defined as philosophy of beauty, or of philosophy of the belle arte, as Hegel himself uses the Italian term, as they were called in the period. So aesthetics as philosophy of the beauty, of the phenomena of the beauty. These are the famous Hegel's lectures where he dealt with the idea of beauty in a twofold manner. On the one hand, a strictly philosophical discussion of what beauty is in relation to his concept of world spirit. And Hegel's definitions, as always, they are much clearer than they look at first sight. His definition of the idea of beauty is that this is the realization of the concept of beauty in reality. So Hegel's idea of idea, so to speak, is twofold. On the one hand, we have the realization, on the other, the concept. And the two possible extremes of this twofold definition of the idea of beauty is simply that on the one hand, you can have a beautiful phenomena that doesn't partake in the concept, and that's precisely the definition of natural beauty. So what is natural beauty? That's a kind of beauty that it is unreflected, that it doesn't possess any spiritual meaning. It is beautiful, but it does not reflect and self-reflect itself in the realm of spirit. That's where the other half comes in hand, the moment of concept, which is the moment of reflectivity, of self-reflection, where the moment of spirit takes in place. And if we cut this in two, what do we have? If we look at the purely conceptual part, we have, of course, aesthetics as a field of philosophy. Adorno, another guy important for this kind of discussion, for example, said that, okay, the natural idea of beauty, it's still held by nature itself, while how can we think of this kind of beauty in the sphere of in the realm of human affairs? This is commodity fetishism, for instance. So commodities sold on the marketplace, they are beautifully packed. Let's say this is the task for the marketing departments to work on how to pack them beautifully, but they do not have a moment of concept because they do not self-reflect themselves as a rule. And starting from this conceptual, let's say, operation, to return to Hegel now, he goes on then to define three classical ideals of beauty, the three spheres, let's say, of the symbolic, classical, and romantic arts, where the symbolic art is the, let's say, starting position as embodied by the architecture of the Oriental world, where in the architecture of the Oriental world, especially in the temples, the idea of the connection between the realization and the concept is ideally merged into one, into the figure in the architectural form of the temple. In the classical artworks, the art form that embodies the classical ideal is Greek sculpture, where especially the sculpture of the Greek gods embody this ideal of a relation between the realization and the concept, while in the romantic ideal, it's the painting and all the romantic artworks of painting, music, and literature, especially, of course, poetry, that embody this renewed dissolution of the relation between one and the other. Another way, maybe more comprehensively, that Hegel puts it, is that this is the relationship of how the subject tries to grasp the absolute, or if you will, God. And the first artwork, the first ideal of the symbolic form of artwork, marks this discrepancy. No? For instance, the temple in the Oriental world is dedicated to the gods, which they inhabit, like they live in these temples, but they do not presentify themselves. They are invisible, so to speak. And the temple is a house of God without God. That's the shortest definition, let's say, of the symbolic ideal of artwork in this milieu. The classical Greek sculptures of the gods, of course, are the ideal embodiment of this distinction between human and gods, because you have the Greek gods, as you probably know, of course, in human form in this sculptural sense. And last but not least, of course, the romantic ideal embodies this dissolution, this enhancement, if you will, between the unattainability of the absolute or God by the human subject and the, of course, modern condition where this takes place. Furthermore, in the second part of his lectures, he goes on in a lengthy discussion of the concrete art forms that goes and mostly cover the classical division of the classical belle arte, architecture, sculpture, and the three romantic art forms of painting, music, and literature and poetry. That as far as Hegel goes. Georgi Lukács, as a Hegelo-Marxist from the beginning of the 20th century, continues this Hegelian story. Lukács is deemed one of the last Hegelians in grand style because he continues Hegel's aesthetic project by dealing with the novel as that artwork, that modern artwork that continues the same aesthetic tradition and embodies the human condition in modern times. The initial and minimum definition of the novel by Lukács is that it is an burgerliche epopee, so bourgeois epic of an individual in a world where God is absent or lost, or in a world that was forfeit by God. That's the Lukács' definition of the setting of the novel in modern times that shapes the whole his discussion, famous discussion in the theory of the novel. And that's the, let's say, second theoretical step one needs to make the connection then to contemporary modern times with, of course, Walter Benjamin and his discussion on the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction, when he initially states that filament photography introduced something radically new in the field of arts, for the status of the artwork significantly changed. How? In the sense that with filament photography, these two arts that replaced painting and theater, the artwork became reproducible. And the moment an artwork becomes reproducible, a series of consequences follow. First and foremost, that there is no distinction between original and copy anymore. With a reproducible form of artwork, as filament photography, there is no original. Every copy is an original, and there is no original of the original, so to speak. There is no blueprint that will be at the basis or at the origin of a certain artwork. And from Walter Benjamin, of course, that covers film and photography, scholars have discussed also the phenomena of TV series as artwork. This was also a much vivid discussion, more vivid in the 90s, where it was not obvious that, of course, TV series were a derivative of the film art, which was, of course, deemed the settima arte by Caludo, by the Italian theoretician Caludo, and which replaced all the previous artworks. And the TV series were then integrated into the same, let's say, framework deemed as serial films. I think this is the most economic definition of a TV series that has these pretensions to become an artwork. And it started to, this attitude or the TV series started to change the moment that movie directors started to direct, of course, TV series, starting with the legendary, of course, Twin Peaks by David Lynch and Mark Frost. Already in the beginning of the 90s, this was the first case of the so-called quality TV phenomena. If you're not familiar with the concept, it was a concept used by American scholars to design this new, what the Americans discovered as a new trend in TV series, starting from The Wire onward, of qualitative or artistic TV series that have this pretense of continuing this tradition. And my thesis, I mean, not only my thesis, but the assumption of this lecture dealing with Nier Automata is precisely that the torch of the Hegelian word spirit developing itself in the sphere of beauty is then historically passed from the TV series to video games. Now, this is like the situation in the classical arts, like in Renaissance times, you have the 7 arts are listed as follow from grammar, logic, rhetoric, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. You see the criteria is we are in the Middle Ages, Renaissance period, the revival of the Greek ideals, and of course the distinctions between the spheres of what is deemed an art is very Greek in mentality, for we find in itself not only, let's say, rhetoric music, which would fit our modern conception of what is art, but also astronomy, geometry, arithmetic, logic, and even grammar, which were deemed as arts or art forms. And this, through a lengthy story that I will not even try to cover here, in modern times becomes, and this is the situation in the 20th century with Caludo, deeming that film and photography replaced the previous 7 arts with the more modern version. And you see in the other column there is precisely the Hegelian list of artworks, the list of artworks from Hegel's time: architecture, sculpture, painting, music, theater, literature, with the inclusion of film, in which TV series were included in the first step, and now it's, let's say, our task to try to include also video games in the same line of inquiry and argumentation. And if one wants to include video games in this line of inquiry, to give them the status of aesthetic artworks, one of course has to repeat, let's say, what Caludo did with film and try to demonstrate in the same way how are video games possible as artworks. And it is in this sense the title of my Slovenian book, Osma umetnost, the 8th art. The video games like 8th art could be regarded as artworks only on the condition that they do, as film and TV series before them, incorporate all the previous art forms. So on this slide, very, very briefly, you see, let's say, amplified and the embodiment of all the previous artworks, the architectural aspect of video games, sculpture aspect, painting aspect, music, dance, writing, and of course cinema or film. All these elements must be of course regarded not, let's say, so directly or straightforwardly as this kind of arts, but must be a little bit more enlarged and conceptually reshaped in order to fit the specific media of video games. For instance, architecture on its own, architecture as architecture is of course the art of man-made buildings, to put it very bluntly and simply. In video games, the first thing that comes, that pops up as distinctive for the sphere of video games is the trait that in video games, not only architecture in the strict sense of the word, like for instance in the games like SimCity, where you build cities, architectural forms, but also nature is part of the same architectural landscape. Or to put it in the other way around, the architectural art in video games is the whole process of world building, regardless of what is built. It's an environment building of the whole setting for video games, including, but not limited to, buildings. So also the natural landscape, everything is shaped as an architectural construction. And similarly, the moment of sculpture, the art of sculpture, encompasses not only, for instance, sculptures that one can encounter in video games, like more or less aesthetically put there only to decorate, let's say, the environment, but everything that is made as a sculpture, as a, let's say, living being inside a video game, has this moment of sculptural artwork. And of course, first and foremost, this pertains to character building. the one we play in the video game, also the non-playable characters, all are sculptural artworks in themselves. On the condition that we, of course, take into account at least Hegel's definition of sculpture, that is that in sculpture there is this moment of self-reflectivity of the spirit where sculpture, of course, mimics or reflects the human beings by being its own spectral reproduction. That's why for Hegel, the most emblematic form of sculpture that paves the way then to painting is the bust, the figure of a person. And in paintings, of course, the portrait, the art of portrait is also emblematically stated as the example of painting, because there you can see all the spiritual range from emotional to rational of a person. So the what art codes in terms of expression, of face expression, in the face expression in this surface, on this superficial level, there is the whole range of human emotion, rational cognitions, and etc. So this is the way how spirit in itself, ungraspable and invisible, is presented on a level of a visual representation of a very concrete form that is the form of sculpture building. So in short, character building is this part where sculpture is embodied in the sphere of video games. And similarly also painting, the painting which is the, again in Hegel's theory in the aesthetics, is the way how we move from the concrete artworks of architecture and sculptures, which are artworks presented in 3D form. With painting we move in a 2D form. The three-dimensional aspect is completely formalized, surfaced into a surface where the painter tries, with the simple moves of the panel, tries to catch, let's say, the essence, the visual essence of the elements that are already present on a visual level, on the level of architecture and sculpture. And that's why for Hegel, painting is already part of the romantic arts, the arts that move on a more, let's say, abstract level, where the point of this kind of art, like painting and also music, etc., it's not to render, let's say, a realistic mimesis of the real world, like for architecture and sculpture. The moment of realism, it's quite important also in video game, of course, construction. But with painting, we move on a more abstract level where the point is how, with as little, let's say, moves, gestures possible, grasp the essence of a character, a landscape, a place, an object even. And that's why, for instance, the example Hegel gives are the old art now, I think, completely lost of silhouetting. I don't know if there's a German, there is when you have the black piece of paper and then the artist just cut out the silhouette, the profile of a person, and with this silhouetting he tried to grasp the character, so the spiritual essence of a character, just by this minimal process of silhouetting the person's profile. And this is, for Hegel, this is the minimal instance or element that is essential to painting. So how with as little element as possible maximize the essential elements of person or object or landscape or architectural construction or anything that is represented on this level. Of course, with all the arsenal that pertains to painting, from colors to perspective and everything that pertains to the art of painting as such, and its long history stretching back again to Greek times. Something similar that happens with the transition from architecture and sculpture to painting happens from painting to music. Again, music is an additional abstraction of the concrete coordinates that inform the previous artworks. If painting is a move from a 3D perspective to 2D perspective, then music is the movement, is the further movement from 2D perspective to one dimension only, and that's the dimension of time. Hegel defines music as the art of time. It's an art that has only one dimension, and its dimension is time. And here, all the concreteness, the visual representation, is abstracted to one dimension only, the dimension of time, where music conveys everything that the previous art forms of architecture, sculpture, and painting conveyed, but in this minimal sonoric element that embodies all this range of spirit, ranging from rational to emotional. In music, one, in a similar vein as before, gains or comprehends the essence of a person, of a character, even when music is environmental, of a landscape or a place, or even linked to certain specific objects. It gains this quality of essentialization. Something slightly different happens with dance, which was added to the pantheon of artworks only later on in the beginning of the 20th century, but it gained like a autonomous status in connection especially to theater, and nowadays they are all regarded, dance, theater, and all similar art forms are regarded as part of the performance arts. So performance arts cover, let's say, all these different artworks that involve the human body on stage with certain visual and audio elements, accompanied or not by music, with a certain scenography, etc. Where again the point is that theater, if you take only this example, or performance art, ideally embody all the previous elements. A stage is an architectural construction. The characters put on stage could be regarded as living sculptures. The painting is the whole, let's say, color and perspective range that the theater piece, the stage piece, enacts for the audience, accompanied by music, explicit music as we know it, or even minimal music, the music of the human voice in the parts that are sung or at least given in the form of recitals. And the next art form, the art form of writing or literature at large. Okay, for Hegel, it was only poetry got this status of literary artwork. But of course, that's why I mentioned Lukács enlarged this conception also to the prose of the novel. And today, of course, we regard every form of literature, from poetry to dramatic poetry or theater pieces to cinema writing. Any form of artistic writing is deemed literature in this sense, if its object is, of course, to convey beauty through its own medium. And in writing, of course, is the most emblematic moment of writing in video games is, of course, the script of the story. So the specific way how video games tell their story, the storytelling element of the video games, is the moment of literature as it is conveyed through this or that storyline that a video game has. And last but not least, the cinematic element, the element of cinema or the movies, is perhaps most palpably grasped in the 90s, where the video games try to incorporate the cinematic texture with titles like the one presented there, Wing Commander 3, or Phantasmagoria, or rather Gabriel Knight, the second part. So that's certain titles that incorporated cinematic sequences in between the gameplay. These were the first attempt to incorporate cinematic elements inside its own textures. And this polemic between video games and cinema, of course, has its own history and still ongoing debate, how they, let's say, inform and implement the methods, techniques, styles of each other into each other. And I think it's not a coincidence that, just as a footnote, that the first 10 or so cinematization of video games, from Doom, Mario Brothers, what were from the Street Fighter and stuff like that. If you watch like a retro cinema night, if you will have, you can you can watch how they first try to cinematically represent video games. These are all very bad movies, and it was obvious that the way was not this artistic implementation did not go both ways equally well, because video games developed these cinematic elements through the years to it's one of the most best peaks was, at least for me, Alan Wake 2, which was cinematic in the sense that the video game itself, the gameplay itself, was cinematized, not only with the cutscenes, which are like separate cinematic parts of a video game, but the gameplay itself became ultimately cinematized. And on the other hand, no movie could render a video game properly. This was also in the latest titles that try to really do justice to the video game titles like Assassin's Creed and so on. And it was only in the form of a TV series that video games found their cinematic medium proper, with Last of Us and Fallout most recently. And there are reasons why is this so, why video games did not work in the cinematic sphere but do work in TV series, which I will not dwell any longer. My point being is that if we want to regard video games as artworks, then they must be regarded as Gesamtkunstwerk. This term was used by Richard Wagner to designate his idea of opera, which would incorporate all the previous artworks in itself. Like I shortly described in terms of a theater stage, that was Wagner's idea of his opera as a, again, revival of the Greek ideal of theater. The Greek theater was more similar to modern conceptions of opera or musical, if you will, than to the classical Shakespearean theater from the more modern European times. And in this sense, the Gesamtkunstwerk, complete artwork, the main idea is that if an artwork is a complete artwork, it must incorporate all these elements. And if we want to argue that video games are art, they can be art only on this condition that they are complete or total artworks. So that they have these elements that they incorporate into the texture, considering all the history of this art. So one who wants to dwell on this kind of level of analysis of video games must also know at least some history of art history of all these artworks in order to, let's say, for instance, for the very practical reason that I'm involved in game review, for instance, for the journal I mentioned, I usually do try to systematically look at all these elements, how are they employed, represented, used, and interpreted in various video games, where, of course, not all video games cover all the bases. So not all video games have or pay attention or develop all these previous 7 artworks in their texture. But certain video games do, and one of them is, of course, Nier Automata. And Nier Automata, which could be interpreted and regarded as one of the ideal cases that one can possibly study of a video game that incorporates all the mentioned classical artworks, including cinema and television. Now, the problem with Nier Automata is that it's a part of a quite larger universe, and in this sense, it's not only a Gesamtkunstwerk, but it's also a postmodern artwork, because it fits all the criteria that, for instance, Umberto Eco, the Italian art historian and philosopher, deemed necessary for an artwork to be deemed a postmodern artwork, from the elements of pastiche, intertextuality, autoreferential references, and especially its detachability, so that every element used in one artwork can be re-employed, reinterpreted in the other. And the so-called DrakeNier universe, named so because it encompasses 3 games from the Drakengard series and the 3 games from the Nier series, which I will move now into, where Nier Automata is just one step in this long history of video games, where not only in terms of gameplay and what the game presents in the larger landscape of video games, but especially on the level of storytelling. There is a story that the director of the video game, Yoko Taro, tells through all of these titles. And for instance, I started my Yoko Taro experience, like many of us, with Nier Automata, which became the game of one of the game of the years of the 2017, where by starting to play, you of course have the feeling that there are certain parts missing. You discover and research the story through replaying it, going through all its endings, but still there are a lot of narrative elements just lying there and that are not explained, where of course by Googling all this and that questions, you find out that there is a whole universe preceding this that goes back to Nier Gestalt, so-called, it has two versions, Gestalt and Replicant, for the Japanese and Asian markets one, and for the European and Western at large the other. And going back that it has, that not only Nier Automata has its prequel in Nier Gestalt, but that also the whole Nier series has its prequels in the Drakengard universe, the Japanese title Dragoon, known under the original Japanese title Dragoon, that sets, let's say, the basis for the story of Nier. How many of you have played Nier Automata? Okay, how many of you did, after playing Nier Automata, go back to Replicant? How many did you go back to Drakengard? So you see, we shrink, the experience shrinks there. To make a public confession, I did cover all the Nier video games because I'm a fan of these ones, but I played only Drakengard 3 of the original series. I found recently, when I traveled to Japan, I found the first two, but after buying them, I found out that they are only in Japanese. My Japanese is very poor, definitely not a match for Yoko Taro's first two games, so still searching around. This is one of the, I think, geek pleasures of playing video games is you go around in retro games shop, on Comic Cons, and you hunt for these old titles, try to get to the origin of this or that phenomena. Depends on your tastes, of course, but in terms of engaging with the Nier universe, it's quite a challenge, especially for its storytelling aspect. If we would have time to go into the narrative part, this is what it takes to cover all the bases. I'm just, maybe for those interested, for those that you played Automata, so that you know where does the game and its narrative takes place. It takes place 8,000 years after the events of Nier ending E. All of Yoko Taro games have this multiple ending storytelling where each ending in the game, all of them, not only Nier, also Drakengard, where usually the last ending possible is the most hard ending possible to achieve. Also, the worst ending one can experience in terms of existential crisis, let's say, or at least some anxiety crisis. And it's usually the ending that paves the way for the next title. So, the ending of Drakengard 3, one of the endings of Drakengard 3, introduces this idea of a virus before the pandemic. We are talking about 10 years before the pandemic. This idea of a virus that almost wipes up the global population, where in Nier Replicant / Gestalt, we are in the situation of a post-apocalyptic world where humanity is almost extinct and managed to survive only by this very philosophical Cartesian move of cleaving the human existence into two. So on the one hand, the body, the other, the soul, and until humanity finds the cure for the body, these two instances will live their separate lives in order for humanity to survive. And one of the endings of Replicant, ending E, one of the saddest endings in the history of video games, paves the way then for Nier Automata, where we are 8,000 years after this ending K, where the battle between the androids for humanity, fighting for humanity, with the robots that are the invasion force of an alien species, fight on a post-apocalyptic Earth, where they fight for the fate of humanity, both trying to redeem for themselves. That's a very long story covered in a very short way. And in on this, let's say, very largely, on this very large and epic narrative that the story is told, on which the story is based and told, we can observe how the game from the original three Drakengard titles moves to the Nier titles, and how it develops all elements that we mentioned previously. So one could watch the whole series as a development of all these elements that culminate at the end with Nier Automata. And all these elements can be broken down to this simple, all these artworks, pardon, could be broken down to these simple elements. Architecture to the world building of Nier Automata, sculpture to character design, painting to specific level designs, music to, of course, the legendary soundtrack, theater to the gameplay itself, and partially to the narrative, literature especially to the narrative and specific way the game tells its story, and last but not least, the movie in its cinematics and also partially again combat system. If we start with the first two, the architecture and sculpture, the architectural construction of the world is based on its previous titles, Nier Replicant and also Drakengard series, where we have a recurrence of 3-4 landscapes. The first one is a literal post-apocalyptic architectural sculpture with, as presented here, for instance, with buildings from our world destroyed, half claimed back by nature. Only that the setting is different. The Drakengard series and partially Nier series is more, let's say, fantasy inspired. This one is more cyberpunkly inspired, but the same level and landscape is presented in all these games on with different takes on the story. The second one is the desert. Third one is a forest. And fourth one differs from game to game, but usually it's a landscape by the sea. So you have this very simple idea of 4 different landscapes: desert, seaside, forest, and urban, which is also coincidentally one of the settings used in different sci-fi and fantasy novels, movies, etc., to render like the idea of completely different worlds. For instance, you have you know, of course, the Star Wars franchise, which starts up with 4 planets which are covered basically by these natural extremes found on planet Earth: desert, seaside, forest, and urban landscape, which emblematically presents each one of them. And these different landscapes also have their own colorit, their own colors that pertain to like these painting elements. Of course, the more yellowish for the desert, the more greenish for the forest, bluish for the seaside, and grayish for the urban landscape. And inside of these landscapes, if we leave aside the whole Drakengard / Nier Replicant Gestalt characters, here, as I mentioned, we have the androids of the Yorha squad. The Yorha, untranslatable, but it means a leaf that is deemed to pass. That would be the literal translation from Japanese, or at least the one that Yoko Taro, as the director, as the author of these video games, intended. And the Yorha squad, as I mentioned, are there. This squad of androids their function is to battle the robots in the name of humanity, which programmed and shaped them, as we are told in the in-story script, on their own image. The funny thing is that if you look at the sculpture build of the androids versus the robots, is that you have this very palpable contrast between the androids that they're humanoid, that they have the shape of the human body, in comparison to the robots that are really this caricature or extreme version of a what would imagine as a robot. And this has a particular function inside the storytelling, is that, of course, the initial setting is a setting of good versus evil, the good androids that battle for humanity versus the robots that try to eradicate humanity. That's the, let's say, first playthrough where you reach the first possible ending. It fits, let's say, the most basic storytelling coordinates of fight good versus evil, where, of course, through the multiple ending and storytelling that goes on and on inside the Automata universe, you find out, of course, that these positions are not only very different, but even at the end reversible between the androids and the robots. And this contrast in character shaping operates a precise function that it tries to appeal to our prejudices, that we, of course, as human, identify more with a human shape than a robot shape, where the game, the story, Yoko Taro with his idea, shapes this our place on our prejudice and reshapes the story through reversal of these positions. So the game catches our, let's say, empathy and prejudices through a simple thing as is a character shaping. Just by giving the androids a human form, it produces a trap for our emotional identification, where the robots, on the other hand, are, of course, presented as initially as the villains, and then their positions change. As for the post-apocalyptical world, one final note on the environment that is presented to us. It has not only this aesthetical dimension that it's beautiful to watch and to play in, but it has also a certain narrative that is told, or at least some questions that that are asked from the environment to us. For instance, the basic question is, how did the world end? That's why I mentioned, if we want to know how the world ended, we find in Automata, we find only sporadic references to the world before and how the world ended. If you want the answer, you need to play Replicant and Gestalt, which enacts this world ending and presents then the landscape in which we play the story of Automata, and in which the story of Automata plays out in a very different way than what we expect at the beginning. The second element is that, of course, this world is there is this quality of environmental narrative or storytelling, where you find certain objects from the world before, human-made objects, especially artworks, novels, books, paintings, etc., which are all like monuments to the world before, to monuments to the humanity that left Earth and is now supposedly living on a base in Moon, waiting for its return to Earth. And this is the way how not only the androids, which are already humanly shaped, engage with the, let's say, human heritage on Earth through art, especially, and develop what is forbidden for them to develop, that is rational, cognitive reflection of their position in the world, and especially, of course, emotions. So that the two protagonists, androids, 2B and 9S, depicted in the picture upright, slowly develop, of course, this emotional, very tragic relationship between them through the engagement with the arts that they found in these various settings, and this is how they discover, let's say, their own humanity. Problem being, of course, that parallel to their discovering of their, let's say, human soul or heart inside their android body, the robots are doing the same. So both antagonists in this game are engaging with the human heritage through engaging with human art, reading books, etc. You have all these beautiful cutscenes with what are they two reading, for instance, the Adam and Eve, the leaders of the robots, of the army of the aliens in the world, start, of course, with their names, Adam and Eve Day. What book do they read first? Of course, the Bible. No? The 2B and 9S start, on the other hand, with modernistic literature, where they at one point collide with one robot called Pascal. Of course, Blaise Pascal is the reference, which quotes practically the whole history of Western philosophy from Sartre to Nietzsche, like by heart, and reflects some conditions of what is going on. On a philosophical level, I will move then forward. There is a lot to explore, but maybe when we come to the narrative part. So the second slide, the music, also a very important element of especially Nier Automata, video games in general, but of Nier Automata, especially because it was composed especially for this game. It does not use any outside, let's say, references like classical piano or other pieces. All the music was composed by the studio Monica from Tokyo, and this studio was already participated under this name or certain artists from the studio already from the Drakengard series. So you have some recurrent motifs, musical pieces that were reused, reinterpreted inside the Nier Automata universe, and the music was so beautiful and popular that it had many, let's say, offsprings in different other art forms, from, of course, CDs and even vinyl discs, LPs of the piano collection, the soundtrack, etc., to such, let's say, fetishistic objects as a musical box of Nier Automata, like this one. Okay, this is a very fetishistic representation, but you find Automata music box with certain songs, like perhaps one of the most popular songs of the ancients, which was one of the most known song from the Nier universe, composition from the Nier universe. It's one of the most recurring songs, one song that also has a story in itself to tell, and that was that also gained popularity even outside the Nier community and outside the video game community. It was so popular in Japan that they use it even for the opening ceremony of the Tokyo Olympics from years ago. I think we don't have time to play the song, but I invite you to listen, even if you're not Nier Automata fans or not, the Song of the Ancients, and it's any version will do. It's one of the best and most beautiful songs. And on this note, this also shows one of the elements that I briefly mentioned, elements of postmodernism of Nier Automata. That is that that certain elements, that their detachability means that certain elements could be detached from their original context, like, for instance, a song, and still work separately as an art form. So this song does not only work inside the gameplay as, let's say, a company, or to give a mood, an atmosphere, or to give an emotional impression, but can work in itself as an art piece, as precisely a song to play on the piano or to listen in its sung version and similar. And this element of postmodernism, of detachability, is especially marked in this other aspect of theater and enactment of the story of Automata, in the sense that it had many offspring from the Nier orchestra. This is a musical, so a theater/musical performance that was played during the years, once a year, every time in a different way, to single theater pieces, and vice versa. Also, this theatrical element, let's say, of Nier Automata is seen and can be discernible because of its super dramatic structure, the story that slowly progresses to dramatic moments, such as the choice to pick one of the two androids for the final battle, and of course, the multiple ending gameplay allows you to play both. You are encouraged to do so if you want to experience the consequences of each story and the story as a whole in full. And mostly so, of course, the, let's say, literature element of the Nier Automata, of the Nier universe in general and Nier Automata in particular, which was the springboard for many literary adaptation from novels to mangas. Most recently, the Pearl Harbor Descent records was featured in the homonymous anime, Nier Automata version 1.1a that launched some time ago. And especially its narrative can be seen like how this postmodern element of the narrative that completes itself not only through their own titles, so how one video game referred to its previous one, back to the Drakengard trilogy, but also how the story is told and retold and interpreted and even continued, because it's let's say half open ending. The last ending of Automata is a half open ending that also leaves some, if not most, crucial questions unanswered. And all these narrative lines are then answered part by part. So again, partially by the Nier orchestra performance, by the theater performance, by novels, and even by what you saw perhaps in my first slide on Automata, Nier Reincarnation, a mobile game. A mobile game that was out for, I think, 2 years. I caught up only the last year before it terminated its services. So they gave some crucial part of the narrative, of the story inside. They built it inside a mobile video game. It was a great game, otherwise a very non-conventional mobile game, where all the data was irrevocably lost, except for the, of course, hardcore Nier fans that try to make videos and photos and build this immense, add to this immense Nier archive, as it is called, where, among other things, you can find the Automata text files for every video game, text files which cover practically all that is written in this video game. So the whole texture, in a quite literal sense of the word, is saved on different servers by hardcore fans that wanted this narrative to still go on. And of course, the big event that is going to come to answer all the prayers, this is a slide shot from the Nier Reincarnation mobile game, is what will Yoko Taro do with Nier 3, or the continuation of the finalization of the trilogy, where the pessimists say that, well, we already got Nier 3, that's Nier Reincarnation. Who was able to play it on mobile for those 2 or 3 years that the game was launched, got the ending that finalized the whole narrative. And the optimists who still think that Yoko Taro will return to this universe and do a third title with this or that character and protagonist that will finally answer all the question. As for me, I'm of course as a fan, I would love to see a continuation of the title in a different form, so in Nier 3. But I think the idea of giving the let's say the last word so the idea of giving an ending to the whole this epic narrative that spans through 6 games and various side artworks such as novels, anime, etc., to put the very last ending, the ultimate ending, inside a mobile video game with a shortened lifespan that nobody will be able to play again because it's irrevocably lost. I think it's brilliant in the same sense that Yoko Taro shaped all the endings, one worse than the other, that really appeal and managed to produce a veritable existential crisis for the one playing. So this is like, that's why I regard the experience of Nier Automata and the Nier universe as the ultimate existentialist experience of video games, the way it manages to use what is like a presupposition of every video game, its interactivity, in the function of immersivity, so the way how you immerse into the world in order to produce this ultimate existential automata sucker punch that still gets you, or at least still gets me after all these years after playing. So thank you for your attention, and we have left some time, of course, for your discussion question, commentary that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mirt. I'm going to steal that microphone from you because you have your own
Yes.
perfectly master speaker one right around your neck. So if you guys have any questions, I will hand you the mic for your moment to shine.
I'm really interested in those that played Automata. That if you would agree with such a take on the game.
Hi. The problem for me is that I didn't play the game. Also, another problem for me is that I want to play the game, but I don't have time to play the game.
You don't have 120 hours.
Yeah, exactly. And plus, I already have like games that I still have like on the backlog that like I will do it. I promise I will do it. So I love the presentation. It's really great. It really emphasizes that the games could be like even more than the sum of its parts, you know. And I really like that when game developers make that kind of thing and when people experience that. So my question would be, do you have like any other examples of that except for Automaton and Nier? Because I cannot talk about it. I didn't play. I heard it was amazing and everything, but like,
how do you engage in such a
how do I engage with this, something that I've never even touched?
Start playing. That's the shortest answer. I mean, I think Automata is still. You that played can tell me if you agree or not, but I think it's still a standalone video game that works out nicely with its multiple ending, if you're willing to play through, and that it can engage you and give you just enough to get you hooked. Then you will not want to play the other titles, but you will need to play them because it will be frustrating not to know, you know, what's going on in the narrative. So just start playing. The game will perform its function of engaging you, of immersing you in its texture, and I'm sure it will not loosen its grasp. But the other thing I wanted to say is that I feel you. I think we all that play video games, we have the same problems that the more modern titles, the more the game try to really develop its full potential, the more engaging they become, the more game hours they demand of us. And it's really crazy, especially for the last 5-10 years, if you think how many legendary titles came out and you could not play them all, no? But I think we do live in the golden age of video games. This was unprecedented before, and believe me, it will not endure. This is really the peak of the video game industry as one of the part of the creative industries, and we are really living in a time that all these titles are really calling for us that we must play this and try to engage on very different levels, and we don't have those 120 hours that these games such as Nier Automata or the latest we were just talking, I don't know if you know, Metaphor Fantasio just came out recently, and I think it's also one of those kind of games that you need 100 hours, but it has this level that I think I'm still in the middle of the game, so but I think it has this level of detail covering all the bases of all the possible artworks. But otherwise, a short one that I play and replay from time to time, Alan Wake and Alan Wake 2. I think that's one of the best titles you can get, especially in terms of storytelling, narrative, the link to literature, the theatrical, let's say, dramatic part, not to speak of its, of course, music, many twist plots, etc. This one is very short, enjoyable, playable, and you can really try to apply, let's say, what I sketched here for you in a very, condensed manner. All these elements, architecture, sculpture, painting, music, dance, theater, performance, even acting, as long as the actors are concerned. And of course, the way, I think Alan Wake 2 presents one of the best video games on take on literature. So the narrative of Alan Wake, even not considering the fact that, of course, the protagonist is a writer himself, not considering all the million references to Stephen King and the horror genre, the narrative itself, how especially the second title, Alan Wake 2, shapes this narrative and explores its possible way of storytelling, I think it exceeds the literary form from which it derives. So the same way that the video games at certain points with titles like, I don't know, God of War, the reboot, Alan Wake especially, and other titles, overcame the boundaries of cinema, of the film as an artistic medium. With Alan Wake, Automata, Metaphor, Fantasio, I think they exceeded the boundaries of literature. The way the video games tell their story, the narrative of the video games, is now so well made that it, so to speak, discovered its own language for the first time. So that it doesn't need to borrow from literature and literary artworks like poems, novels, dramas, etc. But they managed to find this way of a very original creative storytelling that is unique to its own medium. Are you playing Metaphor Fantasio now? No. Already? It came in end of October. Yeah, bravo.
First of all, thank you. Yes, thank you for the lecture. It was very enlightening, and specifically because some of the topics that you've mentioned. For example, I, as a player, as a person who played like Nier games, I had a different perception of them. But probably it might be because I haven't played the 3 games which were which give like a strong background. But still, I think that's the beauty of this game, as you've mentioned, that you can. It's rather a standalone game. You can play it as a unique experience, like without depending on the previous games. Like, you don't have to have like a expanded knowledge into the topic, but still. And also, once I've heard such a take that Nier Automata is sort of a reinvention, or like maybe another look on Christian lore, or like Christianity in video games, and specifically the story itself. Would you agree or not really?
I would agree with in a Zizkian sense that it's Christian and atheist at the same time. So you have at the beginning of Automata, I don't know if you caught it, it's to be speaking. This is the very first sentence you hear in the game. That sometimes she feels that we are just puppets in the hands of the gods that are inaccessible, and she wants to fight them. That's basically the idea, which is a Nietzschean one, to fight the gods that created us. And this is the whole, it structures the whole meta-narrative, let's say, of Automata. But I think one must consider that Yoko Taro, as Japanese, of course, has this many Christian references, and but I think the most direct reference is actually Evangelion, which he mentions that was one of the inspiring, let's say, stories or arts that informed the whole Nier universe. And the specific Evangelion idea of Christianity, which is very based in Japanese culture, where, as you probably know, they don't have this very strict distinction between atheism, faith, religion, and where, like in my recent travel to Japan, one guy that guested us, and we engaged into a discussion on religion, said that there is this stereotype about the Japanese that is mostly true, and that is that the Japanese are born into Shinto, they get married Christian, but they die as Buddhist. And I think this covers pretty much also the Nier universe. If you look at the setting, it's very, let's say, multi-religious, with all the gods, pagan gods that are invented for the story itself to be told. Especially I'm referring, of course, to Replicant and Gestalt, the fantasy world that's set there. Then it develops certain Christian, distinctively Christian elements that you noticed and I assume enjoyed. But the endings are really Buddhist. I mean, the nothingness as represented in Buddhism is for us as, let's say, Western players or audience of the game, is the moment that produces that moment of existential anxiety. And of course the connection is that existentialism is built around the philosophical idea of nothingness. The question is, why is for Buddhists the idea of nothingness calming, and for us an existential dilemma, or at least something that produces certain anxiety? And the answer is probably precisely because of our cultural Christian background, where even if we are not Christians, we are still contaminated by Christianity in this. And it is in this sense that I mentioned Žižek's latest book. I don't know if it's translated in English already or not. In Slovenian, he published it this year on Christian atheism. So he purposely joins the two aspects together.
Oh, okay. Yes, that was also interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, thank you very much. I think we're almost out of time, so I'll try to keep it short. I have two quick questions, but first, thank you for the talk. It was super interesting.
Shoot away. Thank you.
So my first question is, you mentioned these postmodern art video games like ReFantasio, Nier. Then if you go even like decades back, I think Final Fantasy VII would even qualify in some way. And you mentioned Alan Wake, but I haven't played Alan Wake, so unfortunately I can't comment on that. But all of these others happen to be Japanese, right?
Yeah.
Do you have any idea why that is?
That's a good question. But I think, yeah, Alan Wake, as a non-Japanese game, still fits the profile. And I think partially the answer would lie in what I already briefly tried to explain, and that's the multi-religious take of the Japanese towards religion. And I think it's connected to that the way they do not see the religion issue as, that you need to identify with one religion, live it through your whole life, but you can switch inside a lifetime in different periods of your life, religion from religion to religion, or even, synchronically speaking, at one point in your life you can have or believe in many different gods from many different religious backgrounds. This is what we would in the West consider as postmodern religious form, which there it makes perfect sense. It's not contradictory, or it does not inhibit them in any way. But there are also other elements of postmodernism which are not, let's say, distinctively Japanese, or something that the Japanese would have a privileged take on. Like, for instance, what I mentioned about the touchability. Okay, you can take one element, fetishize it, produce of course, in the marketplace there is always a space for this or that miniature, figure, CD. There are many ways of sell these detachable elements from the video game. Perhaps the other thing I mentioned only briefly is also important. That's this autopoietic element. So how does the video game reflect itself? And actually, I think Alan Wake 2, the second part, has a more reflective stance. Has this kind of meta narrative where the game reflects itself as a game. It's even features inside that based on Alan Wake's novels. They made also a video game. And it's hinted that we are playing exactly this video game that is made based on Alan Wake's novel, which is based supposedly in the reality of the video game. And you have this Ouroboros structure with which the whole video game from time to time plays. And it's basically something that builds upon the very good old modernist Brechtian move of the breaking of the fourth wall. No? So that's I think the element that one should look upon in this case. As for let's say cultural comparative issues, so how come that the Japanese produce the best postmodern games? That's a whole different discussion. I feel I would have to prepare to give you a proper answer for that.
No, thank you very much.
What's your second one? Yes.
Yeah, just real quick, it's more of a comment maybe even. I seem to remember Yoko Taro saying in an interview that he never wants to give people what they want. And so I think it's very interesting, this obsession with a clearly defined ending to the whole Nier trilogy, as you mentioned. Personally, I assume it will not come. And if it will come, it will not be what people want.
Yes.
I think the same happened with the Replicant remake that recently came out that had the new ending E added. And as far as I know, most people were not happy with it. So
Yeah.
maybe it is already complete in its incompletion.
That,
in a way.
that's the pessimistic interpretation I mentioned briefly. The new ending of Replicant is actually at one point it's retaken in the Nier Reincarnation in the mobile game. So the idea was that the remake of the Gestalt into Replicant was only a way to breach the storylines. So you have an ending in the Replicant, then you have Automata, which remained untouched with all the orchestral, novel, anime, manga offsprings. And then you have Nier Reincarnation that at one point takes the additional ending of the Replicant to reinterpret Automata. So to give let's say another final ending for the whole trilogy, and this ending lost. Whoever played, the others will not get it, if not in second hand by YouTube videos, etc. And I would agree that Yoko Taro is quite a perverse director of video games, but one must take his public announcements, I think, always with a grain of salt, because he likes to provoke. No? For instance, when asked if he will make a continuation of the Automata, he said, "I'm a slave of capitalism. If they pay me, I will do it." No? That was one of also his answers, which is another way of modernistically breaking, to state the obvious and doing a subversion of the usual. No, he's not like he says. They ask him, "How did you manage to do such a deep characters as the to be protagonist of Nier Automata, etc.?" And he answers, "Oh, I like pretty girls." Like I didn't give it even a thought about, but this is like I think very Lynchian. David Lynch has a similar. Like he always tries to, a little plays around, pretends to be dumber than he is, that he has no answer. Oh, this idea just came from somewhere. Yoko Taro is, I think, one of the, like Sam Lake and also other directors in video games, they really understood the name of the game in the sense, what does it mean to be a director of a video game? And they started to play this role publicly in the same way that the old directors from the, let's say, French tradition, from Truffaut to Godard and others, played in the cinema. And they do make a fair point, at least in the sense of what I mentioned beforehand, that the TV series were not deemed art or worthy of aesthetical consideration until movie directors came to direct. And I think this is also a way of how video games try to fight their way into the pantheon of aesthetic pantheon of the artworks by promoting the directors of video games on the same level as film directors. And that this is still this question of authorship, the old question that was raised by Carrière de Cinéma during the times of the classical French cinema, etc. The question of the auteur, of the author of a video game, that it's still based on the old aesthetic assumption that there is an author for the artwork, and that if you can detach these two, that you lose the distinctive element of authorship of the. And that was also Felix, if you correct me if I'm wrong, but this was also one of the arguments that video games are not art because they are a product of a collective work. And the video games answered precisely by positioning these kind of auteurs, directors that supposedly embody this one mind, an idea, artistic idea of a video game in order to answer, I think, also this kind of critics, which is absurd because TV series, movies, but even if you look at the sculpture, architecture, and painting, all the old masters from the Renaissance, Michelangelo and so on, they all had their own workshops. No artist, except perhaps the writer, the poet, the one that works with words, no artist can work alone. But even writers do not work alone in the last instance. It's always a collective work. I think this is an old romantic idea that there is this genial, singular person from whose mind everything springs out. And in Yoko Taro's case, for instance, at least Studio Monica is a good example. The music they make were also shaped in part of the narrative. Yoko Taro himself, in another occasion, says that he adapted. At one point, they asked them to do the music. When he heard the music, he adapted the story to fit the music a little bit. I think for Replicant especially, Gestalt in the original. Yes.
Wonderful. Dear Mirt, I think you began with Hegel, so maybe you allow me to close with Hegel a little bit. We had an awesome thesis on the front stage. Back from the back row, from the anti-thesis, I say let's call it a sublation and call it a wonderful guest lecture. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you.